The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Dusty Hollow, Arizona Territory, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Clara Whitfield stood at the window of the one-room schoolhouse, her spine as straight as the ruler she held in her hand. Not a strand of her dark hair escaped the severe bun at the nape of her neck, and her gray dress, buttoned to the throat despite the heat, spoke of propriety and restraint. The children in her classroom sat in perfect silence, their slates before them, scratching out their letters with careful precision. They had learned quickly that Mrs. Whitfield did not tolerate laziness or disorder. In the 2 years since she'd arrived in Dusty Hollow, not one student had seen her smile. Some whispered she'd forgotten how. That grief had frozen her face when her husband died of fever back east. "Thomas Brennan," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Stand and recite the preamble." The boy rose shakily, his knees knocking together. "Outside." The sound of horses and rowdy laughter drifted through the open window, but Clara's students knew better than to let their attention wander. "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union." Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper. The schoolhouse door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Luke Morgan filled the doorway, all 6 feet of sun-weathered cowboy, his hat askew and dust coating his leather chaps. His blue eyes swept the room before settling on Clara with an intensity that made the smaller children shrink in their seats. "Pardon the interruption, ma'am," he drawled, not sounding sorry at all. "But there's trouble at the courthouse. Thought you ought to know they're fixing to hang old Samuel Fletcher for stealing cattle he never touched." Clara's expression remained unchanged, though her grip on the ruler tightened imperceptibly. "Mr. Morgan, you will remove yourself from my classroom immediately. Whatever lawless behavior you and your associates engage in has no place here." Luke's jaw tightened. "Lawless? That's rich, coming from a town where Judge Blackwood makes up the law as he goes. That old man's got 3 young ones at home and a sick wife. They'll starve without him." "The law is the law," Clara replied coolly. "Now leave, or I shall summon the sheriff." Luke studied her for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes that might have been disappointment. "You know, ma'am, for someone who teaches about justice and righteousness, you sure don't seem to care much about either." He turned on his heel and strode out, leaving a trail of dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Clara stood frozen for a heartbeat before turning back to her students. "Thomas, continue." But the boy's eyes were wide, fixed on the door. "Mrs. Whitfield, is it true about Mr. Fletcher?" "That is not our concern. Continue your recitation." The lesson dragged on, but Clara found her mind wandering to Luke Morgan's words. She knew Samuel Fletcher, his youngest daughter, Mary, sat in the 3rd row, her face pale with worry she was trying hard to hide. The child's slate remained blank, her hands trembling. When the noon bell rang, the children filed out quietly, all except Mary Fletcher, who lingered by her desk. "Mrs. Whitfield," she whispered. "My papa didn't steal nothing. He was home with Mama when them cattle went missing. Judge Blackwood just wants our land 'cause it's got water rights." Clara knelt beside the girl, her voice gentler than usual. "Mary, you must have faith that the truth will prevail." "But what if it don't?" Tears spilled down the child's cheeks. "What if they hang him anyway?" Clara had no answer. She watched Mary run after the other children, then gathered her things with mechanical precision. The courthouse was only a 5-minute walk from the school, and despite her better judgment, she found herself heading in that direction. The crowd outside the courthouse was thick with bodies and anger. Men shouted and waved their fists while women clutched their children close. At the center of it all stood Judge Horace Blackwood, his black suit impeccable despite the dust and heat, his silver hair gleaming like a beacon of respectability. "Order," he bellowed from the courthouse steps. "We are a civilized community, not a mob. Samuel Fletcher has been found guilty of cattle theft by a jury of his peers. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out at sunset." "That jury was handpicked by you." Luke Morgan's voice rose above the crowd. He pushed his way forward, several ranch hands at his back. "Half of them owe you money, and the other half are too scared to cross you." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Morgan, you seem to have forgotten your place. One more word and you'll find yourself sharing Mr. Fletcher's fate." "On what charge?" Luke challenged. "Speaking the truth?" "Sedition," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Inciting violence against lawful authority. Sheriff, arrest this man." The sheriff, a thin man named Josiah Mills, stepped forward reluctantly. He'd known Luke since the younger man had arrived in Dusty Hollow 5 years ago, working his way up from nothing to become one of the most respected cowboys in the territory. "Now, Judge," Mills began. "Luke here's just speaking his mind." "Arrest him," Blackwood repeated, his voice like ice, "or I'll find someone who will." Clara watched as Mills reached for his pistol, saw the resignation in his eyes. She thought of Mary Fletcher's tears, of the fear in the faces around her, of Luke Morgan standing alone against the weight of corrupted authority. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward. "Judge Blackwood." Her voice rang out clear and sharp, causing heads to turn. "On what evidence was Mr. Fletcher convicted?" Blackwood's gaze settled on her with bemused irritation. "Mrs. Whitfield, surely you have better things to do than involve yourself in matters of law. Perhaps some arithmetic to grade?" A few men chuckled nervously, but Clara stood her ground. "I asked about evidence, Your Honor. As an educator, I believe in the importance of facts." "The evidence," Blackwood said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "is that 20 head of cattle bearing the Rocking J brand were found on Fletcher's property." "Were there witnesses to the theft itself?" "The cattle were evidence enough." "I see." Clara's tone could have frozen water in July. "And did anyone consider that Mr. Fletcher's property borders the canyon where flash floods are common, that cattle frequently wander during storms?" Blackwood's face darkened. "Are you questioning the wisdom of this court, madam?" "I am questioning the presence of wisdom in this court at all, sir." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Luke Morgan's eyes widened with something that might have been admiration. "Furthermore," Clara continued, her voice never wavering, "I can provide an alibi for Mr. Fletcher. His daughter Mary was ill 3 nights ago when the theft allegedly occurred. I personally delivered medicine to their home and found Mr. Fletcher tending to his wife, who had taken fever. He could not have been stealing cattle." "Your word against the evidence?" Blackwood sneered. "And the word of a woman who clearly has forgotten her place." "My place," Clara interrupted, "is standing for truth, something this court seems to have abandoned." Blackwood's face flushed purple. "Sheriff Mills, arrest Mrs. Whitfield for contempt of court." Mills hesitated, his hand hovering over his pistol. The crowd pressed closer, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. "You arrest her," Luke said quietly, stepping between Clara and the sheriff. "And you'll have to go through me, and every other decent person in this town." The ranch hands behind him nodded, hands moving to rest on their gun belts. Other men in the crowd shifted, choosing sides. Women pulled their children back, sensing violence about to erupt. Blackwood's eyes darted around, calculating. He was outnumbered, but he had the law, or at least the appearance of it, on his side. "Very well," he said finally. "Mrs. Whitfield's testimony will be taken into consideration. The execution is postponed until tomorrow, pending further investigation. But mark my words, those who stand against the law will face its full consequences." He turned and strode into the courthouse, his men following. The crowd began to disperse, voices rising in excited chatter. Samuel Fletcher's wife pushed through to Clara, tears streaming down her weathered face. "God bless you, Mrs. Whitfield, God bless you! Clara accepted her thanks stiffly, uncomfortable with the attention. She turned to go and found Luke Morgan blocking her path. That was something, he said, his voice low. Didn't think you had it in you. You know nothing about what I have in me, Mr. Morgan. Maybe not. He tipped his hat, a gesture somehow both respectful and challenging. But I'd like to learn. You just bought us time. But Blackwood won't forget this. You've made an enemy today. Aye. Then perhaps it's time someone did. She moved to step around him, but his hand on her elbow stopped her. The touch was gentle, but sent an unexpected jolt through her. I mean it, he said. He's dangerous. You'll need friends now. I don't need anything from you or anyone else. She pulled her arm free. Good day, Mr. Morgan. She walked back to the schoolhouse with measured steps, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What had she done? 2 years of careful control, of maintaining perfect propriety and distance, shattered in a moment of, what, compassion, justice? Or was it something else? The flash of approval in Luke Morgan's eyes? The way he'd stepped forward to defend her without hesitation? She pushed the thought aside and moved to her desk, trying to restore order to her world with familiar routines. But as she opened her Bible to prepare the afternoon's moral instruction, Judge Blackwood's words echoed in her mind. Those who stand against the law will face its full consequences. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with whatever came next. Outside her window, the sun climbed higher, baking the earth to dust. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, wild and free and utterly unafraid. Clara envied it. She had forgotten what it felt like to be unafraid, to act without calculating every consequence. But today, for just a moment, she had remembered, and it terrified her almost as much as Judge Blackwood's threats. The afternoon stretched ahead, but Clara knew everything had changed. The stern schoolmarm who never smiled had shown she was capable of more than anyone had imagined, including herself. The week following the courthouse confrontation passed in a haze of sideways glances and hushed whispers. Clara maintained her rigid schedule, arriving at the schoolhouse before dawn to prepare lessons. But the atmosphere had shifted. Parents who once nodded respectfully now either avoided her gaze or stared with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Mrs. Whitfield. Young Benjamin Hayes raised his hand during arithmetic. My PA says you're brave for standing up to Judge Blackwood, but Ma says you ought to mind your own business. Clara set down her chalk with deliberate calm. Benjamin, what does our reader say about doing what is right? That we should always choose the righteous path, even when it's difficult. Precisely. Now, complete your multiplication tables. The morning dragged on, punctuated by the sound of horses passing outside. Each time hooves thundered past, the children's attention wavered, and Clara found her own concentration slipping. She had not seen Luke Morgan since the incident, though she'd heard his name whispered in the mercantile and the boarding house where she took her meals. At noon, she dismissed the children for lunch, watching them scatter like tumbleweeds in the wind. Mary Fletcher lingered again, approaching Clara's desk with tentative steps. Mrs. Whitfield, Papa wanted me to give you this. She held out a small wooden cross, carved with delicate precision. He made it while he was waiting. He says you're our guardian angel. Clara accepted the gift, her throat tight. Tell your father to have faith. The truth has a way of revealing itself. After Mary left, Clara sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, turning the cross over in her hands. Through the window, she could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon, unusual for this time of year. The air felt charged, heavy with more than just the promise of rain. A shadow fell across her desk. Luke Morgan stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically formal. Afternoon. Ma'am, mind if I come in? She gestured to one of the student benches. He folded his long frame onto the small seat, looking almost comical if not for the serious expression on his face. "Blackwood's been busy," he said without preamble. "He's calling in debts, pressuring folks. Says the school might be a corrupting influence on the children." Clara's spine stiffened further. If that was possible. "Let him try. The Territorial Board of Education is 300 miles away and couldn't care less about one small school in a Dust Bowl town." Luke leaned forward. "You need to understand something about Blackwood. He doesn't just want power. He needs it like most men need air. And you threaten that." I spoke the truth. "Sometimes that's the most dangerous thing you can do." His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Why did you do it? You could have stayed silent, kept your perfect reputation intact." Clara stood, moving to the window to avoid his penetrating gaze. A child was crying for her father. Was I to teach her about justice in the morning and ignore injustice in the afternoon? Most people would have. I am not most people. "No," he said softly. "You're not." The weight of his words hung between them. Clara heard him stand, his boots scraping against the floor. "There's something else," he continued. "Blackwood's bringing in hired guns, professional ones, from Tombstone. He's planning something, and I don't think it's just about Samuel Fletcher anymore." She turned to face him. "Then what is it about?" "Control, complete control, and now you're in his way." Luke moved closer, close enough that she could smell leather and dust and something uniquely him. "You need protection." "I need nothing from Stop." His voice was firm, but not harsh. "Stop pretending you're made of stone. I've seen you with those children, seen the way you fought for Fletcher. There's fire under all that ice. Clara Whitfield, and Blackwood knows it now too." Her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. No one had called her by her given name since Thomas died 3 years ago. "Mrs. Whitfield," she corrected, but her voice lacked conviction. "Clara," he repeated, deliberate and slow. "You're not alone in this. There are others who've been waiting for someone to stand up to Blackwood. Ranchers he's cheated, families he's destroyed. You've given them hope." "I didn't mean to give anyone anything. I simply—" The schoolhouse door burst open. Little Tommy Martinez rushed in, eyes wide with panic. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Morgan, they're going to burn the Fletcher place. Judge Blackwood's men are riding out there now." Luke was moving before the boy finished speaking, checking his pistol as he headed for the door. He paused, looking back at Clara. "Stay here. Keep the children safe." "Like hell," Clara said, the profanity shocking even herself. She grabbed her shawl and bonnet. "Tommy, run to the sheriff's office. Tell him what's happening. Then find the other children and tell them school is dismissed for the day." "Clara, no." She pushed past Luke. "That's Mrs. Whitfield to you, Mr. Morgan, and I'll thank you not to give me orders." His lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, ma'am. You got a horse?" "I can ride." 20 minutes later, they thundered across the desert landscape. Clara's borrowed mare keeping pace with Luke's stallion. Her severe bun had come undone, dark hair streaming behind her like a banner. The proper schoolmarm was disappearing with each mile, replaced by something wilder, more elemental. They smelled smoke before they saw it. Black columns rose from beyond the ridge, and Luke cursed under his breath. As they crested the hill, the Fletcher homestead came into view. The barn was already engulfed in flames, and horsemen circled the small house like vultures. "There," Luke pointed to a group of riders wearing badges. "Those aren't regular deputies. Those are Blackwood's hired killers." Clara counted 6 men, all armed. The Fletcher family huddled on their front porch, Samuel, his wife, and their 3 children, including Mary. "We need help," Clara said. "No time. They'll torch the house next." Luke checked his rifle. I'll create a distraction. You circle around, get the family to safety. That's suicide. You're outnumbered 6-1. Got a better idea. Clara studied the scene below. The hired guns were focused on the family, their backs to the ridge. Yes, give me your rifle. What? I said, give me your rifle, and take off your hat. Confusion flickered across his face, but he complied. Clara positioned herself behind a boulder, the rifle steady in her hands. When I start shooting, you ride down there fast. They'll scatter, thinking they're under attack from multiple positions. Get the Fletchers out while they're confused. Can you even shoot? Clara's eyes narrowed. My husband taught me before he died. I may be a schoolmarm, Mr. Morgan, but I wasn't always one. She fired before he could respond, the shot echoing across the valley. One of the hired gun's hats flew off. She quickly moved position, fired again. Another man's holster exploded in a shower of leather. Luke didn't waste time questioning. He spurred his horse down the slope, whooping like a banshee. The hired guns scattered, believing they were under attack from the ridge. Clara kept firing, careful shots that kept the men dodging without hitting anyone fatally. Luke reached the Fletchers, pulling Mary up onto his horse while Samuel helped his wife climb behind. The other children ran alongside as they made for the relative safety of the wash. One of the hired guns, quicker than the rest, spotted Clara's position. He raised his rifle, and she saw death in the gesture. Time slowed. She couldn't reload fast enough. The shot rang out, but it wasn't from the hired gun. He toppled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Sheriff Mills and a posse of townsmen poured over the opposite ridge, guns blazing. About time, Clara muttered, standing from her position. The hired guns, caught between two forces and with their leader down, broke ranks and fled. The Fletcher barn was lost, but the house stood intact. Clara made her way down the slope, her legs shaking more than she cared to admit. Luke met her halfway, Mary Fletcher still clinging to him. His eyes held something new, respect mixed with wonder. Where did a schoolmarm learn to shoot like that? My husband was a Union officer, Clara said quietly. He insisted I learn to defend myself before we came west, said the frontier was no place for helpless women. He was right about that. Wrong about you being helpless, though. Sheriff Mills approached, tipping his hat. Mrs. Whitfield, mighty fine shooting, though I'm supposed to arrest you for interfering with the law. Those weren't lawmen, Luke interjected. They were hired thugs with fake badges. I know that, and you know that, Mills said. But Judge Blackwood is finished. Samuel Fletcher stepped forward, soot-stained but standing tall. I've had enough. We've all had enough. It's time to contact the territorial marshal. Tell him what's been happening here. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered townsmen. Clara noticed several prominent ranchers among them, men who'd remained silent for too long. That's sedition talk, Mills warned, though his heart wasn't in it. You're talking about going against a territorial judge. No, Clara said, her voice carrying the same authority she used in the classroom. We're talking about justice, real justice, not the mockery Blackwood's been peddling. As the sun set, painting the sky the color of blood and fire, the small group made their way back to town. Clara rode beside Luke, aware of the glances he kept sending her way. You're not who I thought you were, he said finally. I'm exactly who I've always been. She replied, You simply never looked close enough. I'm looking now. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, dangerous and electric as the storm clouds still gathering overhead. Back in town, word spread quickly. The schoolmarm had ridden with Luke Morgan, had shot it out with hired guns, had saved the Fletcher family. By the time Clara reached her boarding house, Mrs. Abernathy, the proprietress, was waiting on the porch. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, her tone disapproving. I run a respectable establishment. I can't have my boarders gallivanting around the countryside, engaging in gunfights. Clara climbed the steps slowly, exhaustion weighing on her. Then I shall find other lodgings. Now, I didn't say that. Mrs. Abernathy's stern expression cracked slightly. Though you might want to fix your hair before supper. You look like you've been riding with savages. Clara touched her wild hair, remembering the pins lost somewhere on the desert floor. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't immediately reach for new ones. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd set in motion. The proper schoolmarm was crumbling, revealing someone she'd thought buried with her husband. Someone who could ride and shoot and stand against injustice without flinching. Someone who noticed the way Luke Morgan's eyes crinkled when he almost smiled, the way his hands were gentle with children despite their strength. Thunder rolled across the desert, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Change was coming to Dusty Hollow, washing away the old certainties like flash floods in the canyon. And Clara Whitfield, who never smiled, felt her lips curve slightly in the darkness. The storm that swept through Dusty Hollow that night left the air clean and sharp, washing away the perpetual dust, but not the tension that gripped the town. Clara arrived at the schoolhouse early, as was her custom, to find Luke Morgan's horse tied to the hitching post and the man himself sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of wood. "Don't you have cattle to tend?" she asked, unlocking the door. "Cattle can wait." He followed her inside without invitation. "Heard there was trouble here last night." Clara surveyed the damaged books scattered across the floor, her desk overturned. Crude words scratched into the blackboard. Her jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady as she began picking up the books. "Blackwood's work?" Luke asked, though they both knew the answer. "Cowards always strike in darkness." She reverently picked up her Bible, its pages torn. "They think this will frighten me into silence." "Will it?" She fixed him with a look that could freeze hellfire. "What do you think?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I think Judge Blackwood has no idea what he's awakened." Together they restored order to the classroom, working in companionable silence. Clara was acutely aware of his presence, the way he handled her books with surprising gentleness, the way he hummed under his breath, the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted her heavy desk. "Why are you really here?" she asked as he repaired a broken chair leg. "Maybe I like the company." "Try again." He set down his tools, meeting her gaze directly. "Because whether you admit it or not, you need allies. And because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about the way you looked yesterday, riding across the desert with your hair down, shooting like Annie Oakley herself." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. That was necessity, nothing more. "Was it?" He stood, closing the distance between them. "Tell me something. Clara, when was the last time you felt alive, truly alive?" "That's not—" Her protest died as he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Such a simple gesture, yet it sent lightning through her veins. "Yesterday," he continued softly, "when you were fighting for what's right, when you dropped that perfect control, that's the real you, isn't it? The one you've been hiding." Clara stepped back, her hand moving instinctively to her throat. "You presume too much, Mr. Morgan." "Luke," he corrected. "And maybe I do, but I recognize a caged spirit when I see one. Question is, are you going to keep hiding behind those high collars and that ruler, or are you going to let her out?" The school bell chimed, saving Clara from answering. Children began arriving, their parents hovering at the edges, uncertain. Some pulled their children away upon seeing the vandalism. Others, like Mrs. Fletcher, pushed them forward with encouraging nods. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," Mary Fletcher said brightly. "Papa says you're going to change everything." "I'm going to teach you arithmetic and reading," Clara replied. That's all. But as the morning progressed, she found herself thinking about Luke's words. When had she last felt truly alive? The answer was painfully clear yesterday, with wind in her hair and justice in her sights. And before that, 3 years ago, before Thomas died, before she'd wrapped herself in widow's weeds and propriety like armor. At the noon break, she kept the children inside, unwilling to expose them to whatever might be waiting. Luke had taken up position outside, ostensibly repairing the front step but clearly standing guard. Through the window, she watched him work, noted the way other cowboys began drifting by, tipping their hats, taking up casual positions around the schoolhouse. Protection, allies, things she'd sworn she didn't need. Hey, Mrs. Whitfield. Susanna Parker, the banker's daughter, raised her hand. My father says you're causing trouble, that good Christian women should be quiet and obedient. What do you think, Susanna? The girl fidgeted. I don't know. Clara moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a worn volume. Let me tell you about Deborah, who led Israel to victory, or Esther, who saved her people by speaking truth to power. The Bible is full of women who refused to be silent in the face of injustice. But they were special, another girl protested, chosen by God. And what makes you think you weren't chosen too? Clara asked. What makes any of us think we're meant to be less than what we could be? The children exchanged glances, something shifting in their young faces. Clara saw it, the spark of possibility, of questioning. This was why Blackwood wanted her gone. Not because she defended Samuel Fletcher, but because she was teaching these children to think, to question, to expect more. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Molly Harper, who ran the town saloon, stood at the schoolhouse door in a dress more modest than her usual attire, though the red silk still drew stares from passing townspeople. Afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield. Might I have a word? Clara had never spoken to the woman beyond cool nods in passing. Proper ladies didn't associate with saloon proprietresses, but proper ladies also didn't shoot it out with hired guns. Of course, children. Continue your reading. They stepped outside, where Luke straightened from his work, hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Molly laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Easy there, cowboy. I'm not here to cause trouble. She turned to Clara. Quite the opposite. Actually, I've got information you need to hear. I'm listening. Blackwood's planning something big. My girls hear things. You understand. He's got a federal marshal in his pocket, coming down from Prescott, plans to arrest you and Luke for inciting rebellion, maybe even terrorism for that barn burning. We didn't burn that barn, Luke protested. His own men. You think that matters? Molly's painted lips twisted. He writes the story. Unless... She glanced at Clara. You ever handle important documents in that teaching of yours? I've taught from many texts. Why? Because I've got something that might interest you. Papers, contracts, things that show where Blackwood's money really comes from, where it goes. Things that would interest a real federal marshal. Clara studied the other woman. Why would you help us? Because Blackwood owns too much of this town already. Because he thinks he owns me and mine. Because... Molly's voice softened. Because 20 years ago, I was a schoolteacher too, before life had other plans. The revelation hung in the air between them. Clara saw her possible future in Molly's painted face. What happened to women who defied convention too boldly, who found themselves outside society's protection? Bring the papers, Clara said finally. After dark, the back door. Molly smiled. You're not what I expected, Clara Whitfield. I'm discovering that myself. After Molly left, Clara found Luke watching her with an unreadable expression. You sure about this? He asked. Associating with her kind. Her kind. Clara's voice turned sharp. A woman trying to survive in a world that offers few choices, yes, I'm sure. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? She faced him squarely. Tell me, Mr. Morgan, do you frequent Molly's establishment? Color rose in his cheeks. That's not... I might have... Then perhaps you should examine your own associations before questioning mine. She turned to go, but his hand on her arm stopped her. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry, it's just, the more I see of you, the more you surprise me. I'm the same woman I've always been. No. His thumb traced a small circle on her arm, the touch burning through her sleeve. The woman who arrived here 2 years ago wouldn't have given Molly Harper the time of day, wouldn't have ridden out to save the Fletchers, wouldn't be standing here letting a cowboy hold her arm in broad daylight. Clara looked down at his hand, knowing she should pull away, knowing the entire town could see them. Instead, she raised her eyes to his. Maybe that woman was tired of being afraid. And now she's discovering that there are things worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Things, his voice dropped lower, or people. The bell tower chimed, breaking the spell. Clara stepped back, smoothing her skirts. The children need me. But as she returned to the classroom, she could still feel the warmth of his touch, still see the promise in his eyes. That evening, as she prepared the classroom for tomorrow's lessons, she found herself actually humming, for the first time in 3 years. The back door creaked open just after sunset. Molly Harper slipped in, a leather satchel clutched to her chest. These could hang him, she whispered, spreading papers across Clara's desk. Or get us all killed. Clara lit another lamp, studying the documents. Bills of sale, ledger entries, correspondence, a web of corruption stretching from Dusty Hollow to Prescott and beyond. Blackwood wasn't just a corrupt judge. He was part of something larger, something that stole land from homesteaders and sold it to mining interests back east. This is bigger than we thought, Clara breathed. Which means he'll do anything to protect it, Molly warned. You'd better have a plan. Clara looked at the saloon owner, seeing past the paint and silk to the woman beneath. Another survivor, another fighter. We'll need to get these to someone who can act on them, someone Blackwood can't buy. The territorial governor. Too far, and too many opportunities for interception. Clara thought rapidly. But there's a federal prosecutor in Tucson. Thomas, my husband, knew him from the war. An honest man. That's a 3-day ride through hostile territory, Luke said from the doorway. Neither woman had heard him enter. Blackwood will have men watching every route. Then we'll need a distraction, Clara said. Something to keep his attention here while someone rides for Tucson. I'll go, Luke offered immediately. No. Clara's response was swift and certain. He'll expect that. We need you here, visible, giving him a target to focus on. She turned to Molly. Do any of your girls know the back trails? Someone who could travel quietly? Molly grinned. Honey, you'd be surprised what my girls know. But why trust us with something this important? Because Blackwood will never suspect it. He sees you as property, not people. It's his weakness. Like he sees you as just a schoolmarm. Molly's grin widened. Oh, I'm starting to like you. Clara Whitfield, really like you. They made their plans by lamplight. 3 unlikely allies bound by necessity and a shared desire for justice. When Molly left, taking the documents with her, Luke lingered. You're trusting her with our lives, he said. I'm trusting her with her own freedom. That's stronger than any oath. Clara began extinguishing the lamps. You should go. It's not proper for us to be here alone after dark. Since when do you care about proper sound? Since I still have children to teach, a reputation to maintain. That reputation's already changing. He moved closer, backing her against her desk. People are talking about the schoolmarm who rides and shoots and stands up to judges. Some are calling you a hero. And others use less flattering terms. His hand came up to cup her cheek. But I know which one I believe. Clara's breath caught. Luke! Tell me to leave, he said softly. Tell me this is wrong. That you don't feel what I feel. Tell me, and I'll walk away right now. She opened her mouth to do just that. To be the proper widow, the stern schoolmarm. Instead, she heard herself whisper, I can't. His lips brushed hers, gentle as a butterfly's wing. She'd forgotten this, the sweetness of being desired, of desiring in return. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat race to match her own. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Luke rested his forehead against hers. What are we doing, Clara? I don't know, she admitted. But for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing. Blackwood will use this against you if he finds out. Say you're corrupting the children, that you're no better than... Then, Molly, Clara pulled back slightly. Maybe I'm not. Maybe none of us are what we pretend to be. Maybe that's the point. She gathered her things, acutely aware of his presence beside her as they left the schoolhouse. The night was clear. Stars scattered like diamonds across velvet, somewhere in the darkness. Molly's girls were preparing to ride for Tucson. Somewhere, Blackwood was plotting their destruction. But in this moment, walking beside Luke Morgan under the vast Arizona sky, Clara felt something she'd thought lost forever hope, not just for justice, but for herself, for the possibility that the woman she'd buried with her husband might rise again, transformed by loss but not destroyed by it. Clara, Luke said as they reached the boarding house, whatever happens next, I want you to know... She pressed her fingers to his lips. Not yet. Let's win this fight first. Then we'll see what comes after. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The schoolmarm, who was too stern to smile. He murmured, I think I saw her smile tonight. A trick of the light, Clara said, but her lips curved even as she spoke. She climbed the steps to the boarding house, feeling his eyes on her until she closed the door. Inside. She caught her reflection in the hall mirror. Her hair was loosening from its bun, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like joy. The woman in the mirror was still Clara Whitfield, but she was also something more, something Blackwood had awakened when he'd tried to break her, something that refused to be silent, refused to be small, refused to be anything less than what she was meant to be. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, Clara Whitfield allowed herself to hope, and somewhere deep in her chest, a fire that had been banked for 3 long years began to burn bright again. The desert night wrapped around the schoolhouse like a shroud, broken only by the faint glow of a single lamp inside. Clara had dismissed the children hours ago, but she remained, ostensibly grading papers while actually watching the street through her window. 3 days had passed since Molly's girls rode for Tucson. 3 days of mounting tension that crackled through Dusty Hollow like heat lightning. A soft knock at the back door made her heart race. She opened it to find Luke, his face grave in the moonlight. You shouldn't be here, she said, even as she stepped aside to let him in. Blackwood knows something's happening. He's got men watching every road, every building. Luke removed his hat, running fingers through dark hair, including this one. Then why come? Because tomorrow he makes his move. Word is he's planning to arrest you at school. In front of the children. Make an example of you. Clara moved to her desk, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. Then I'll be here, teaching as always. Clara, no, you need to run. Tonight, I've got horses ready. And abandon everything I've built here. Let him win. She turned to face him, her gray eyes fierce. I won't give him the satisfaction. Luke crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. Pride won't keep you alive. This isn't about pride. She met his gaze unflinchingly. It's about those children out there who need to see that standing up for what's right matters. That you don't run when evil men try to silence you. even if it costs your life. My life stopped meaning much 3 years ago, she said quietly, until recently. His hands gentled on her shoulders, sliding up to cup her face. Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. Luke. No, listen to me. His voice roughened with emotion. I've been drifting through life since I came to this godforsaken place. Working, drinking, existing. Then you stood up in that courthouse, all fire and righteousness wrapped in gray wool. And suddenly I remembered what it meant to believe in something. In someone. Clara's breath caught. You barely know me. I know enough. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I know you're brave and stubborn and too damn noble for your own good. I know you've got more strength in your little finger than most men have in their whole bodies, and I know that losing you would. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Clara waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Would what? She whispered. Would break something in me that's just starting to heal. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, a coyote howled, lonely and wild. Inside, 2 people stood on the edge of a precipice, knowing that stepping forward would change everything. There's something I need to tell you, Clara said, her voice barely audible. About why I really can't smile. About Thomas. Luke's hands dropped to her waist, holding her gently. You don't have to. I do. If this is... She took a breath, gathering courage. Thomas was a good man, kind, honorable, everything a woman should want. But I didn't love him. Not the way a wife should love her husband. I married him because it was expected, because it was safe. The confession hung between them like a physical thing. Luke remained silent, waiting. We came west because he thought it would help, that maybe in a new place, I could learn to feel what I was supposed to feel. Instead, he died, and all I felt was relief. And the guilt of that relief has been eating me alive for 3 years. Clara, don't you see? Her voice cracked. I'm not the noble widow everyone thinks I am. I'm just a woman who was too cowardly to admit she'd made a mistake, and too cold to love the man who deserved better. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, gently, he tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're not cold. A cold woman wouldn't risk everything for a family she barely knows. Wouldn't take in strays like Molly Harper. Wouldn't burn like fire in my arms. How can you be sure? Because I've held cold women, kissed them, and what I feel when I touch you. He pulled her closer, until their bodies were mere inches apart. That's not cold. Clara, that's lightning waiting to strike. The air between them crackled with tension. Clara felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by a force stronger than propriety or fear. Luke, The front door exploded inward. Judge Blackwood stood silhouetted in the doorway, flanked by 4 armed men. His smile was cold as winter moonlight. Well, the schoolmarm and the cowboy. How disappointingly predictable. He stepped inside, his men fanning out to block any escape. Mrs. Whitfield, you're under arrest for sedition, conspiracy, and moral corruption. Luke's hand moved toward his gun, but Clara caught his wrist. No, that's what he wants. Smart woman, though not smart enough, apparently. Blackwood's eyes glittered with malice. Did you really think I wouldn't know about your little messenger service? My men intercepted those charming ladies 2 days ago. The documents are ash, and let's say they've found new employment far from here. Clara's heart sank, but she kept her face impassive. You have no authority to arrest me. I have all the authority I need. He produced a paper with an official seal, signed by the territorial governor himself. It seems he takes a dim view of revolutionaries threatening the peace. You mean he takes a generous view of your bribes? Luke spat. Blackwood's smile widened. Careful, Mr. Morgan, There's room in the jail for 2, though I think Mrs. Whitfield will find her accommodations. Educational. The territorial prison has special ways of handling rebellious women. Clara felt Luke tense beside her, ready to fight despite the odds. She squeezed his hand once, then stepped forward. I'll come quietly, but first, a moment to gather my things. Of course. Johnson, accompany the lady. Make sure she doesn't do anything foolish. One of the gunmen followed Clara to her desk. She moved deliberately, collecting her Bible, her teaching materials. As she lifted a heavy ledger, she caught Johnson's eyes in the reflection of the window glass. Behind them, Luke was being held at gunpoint, but his attention was fixed on her. "Drop it!" she suddenly cried, flinging the ledger at the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. Clara heard Luke's fist connect with flesh, the crash of furniture, shouts of confusion. She dropped to the floor, crawling toward where she knew the back door waited. Strong hands seized her waist, lifting her. For a moment she struggled, then recognized Luke's scent, his touch. "Trust me," he whispered against her ear. Instead of heading for the door, he pulled her toward the window. With one powerful kick, he shattered the glass and lifted her through. They hit the ground running as shouts erupted behind them. "My horse is this way," Luke gasped, pulling her through the shadows. "No, they'll expect that." Clara tugged him in the opposite direction. "The church. Father Miguel will—" Gunfire split the night. Luke spun, pushing Clara behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. "Go, I'll hold them off." "Not without you." "Damn it, woman! This isn't the time for—" She silenced him by drawing the small derringer from her boot, a gift from Thomas she'd never thought to use. 2 shots cracked out, and 2 of Blackwood's men stumbled back, clutching wounded arms. "You were saying—" "Despite everything," Luke grinned, "remind me never to underestimate a schoolmarm." They ran through the darkened streets, Clara hiking up her skirts, her hair streaming free. "Behind them!" Blackwood's voice rose in fury, ordering his men to spread out, to seal the town. The church loomed before them, a sanctuary of thick adobe walls and ancient faith. They burst through the doors to find Father Miguel at the altar, as if he'd been expecting them. "My children," the old priest said calmly, "you need sanctuary." "Father, we don't want to bring trouble to—" "Trouble came to this town long before you, Senora Whitfield." He moved with surprising speed for his age, pulling back a heavy tapestry to reveal a hidden door. "The mission has kept its secrets for 200 years. It can keep 2 more. They descended into darkness, the priest's candle their only guide. The tunnels were old, carved by indigenous hands long before Spanish boots walked this land. Finally, they emerged into a small chamber furnished with simple necessities. "You'll be safe here," Father Miguel said. "I'll send word when it's clear." "Father, why?" Clara asked. "Why risk yourself for us?" The old man's eyes were sad but kind. "Because I've watched Judge Blackwood poison this town for too long. Because I've seen you bring hope to those children. And because," he smiled, "God works through mysterious vessels. My child, even through stubborn schoolmarms and rough cowboys." He left them with the candle and provisions. In the flickering light, Clara and Luke faced each other, the reality of their situation settling in. "We're trapped," Clara said quietly. "He'll tear the town apart looking for us. Maybe. Or maybe he'll think we ran for the border." Luke moved closer, his presence warming the cool chamber. "Either way, we're alive. That's what matters." "Is it?" Clara sank onto a rough bench, suddenly exhausted. "Molly's girls are gone. The documents are destroyed. We've lost everything." "Not everything." Luke knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Clara, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing her own despair reflected there, along with something else, something that made her breath catch. I meant what I said earlier. He continued. Before Blackwood interrupted, you've awakened something in me I thought was dead. And if we die tomorrow, I need you to know. Don't, she pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't say it. Not here. Not like this. Then when? His voice roughened with frustration. When we're standing before a judge, when they're fitting the noose around our necks. You're not going to hang. Neither are you. He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart thundered. Feel that that's what happens every time I look at you, every time I think about you. It started that day in the courthouse, and it hasn't stopped since. Luke, I love you. Clara Whitfield. The words hung in the air like a prayer. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and even that damned ruler you wave around. I love the fire you try so hard to hide and the woman you're becoming. And if this is our last night on earth, I want to spend it showing you exactly how much. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first she'd shed since Thomas's funeral. I don't know how to do this, how to feel this much and not break apart. Then let me hold you together. He rose, pulling her into his arms. Let me be strong for both of us, just for tonight. She should protest, should maintain the barriers that had kept her safe for 3 years. Instead, she found herself melting against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. I'm frightened, she whispered against his chest. So am I. His lips brushed her hair. But not of Blackwood or his men. I'm frightened of losing you just when I've found you. Clara pulled back to look at him. This man who'd crashed into her ordered life and shaken it to its foundations. In the candlelight, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in its roughness. Then don't lose me, she said simply. His control snapped. His mouth came down on hers, hungry and desperate. This was nothing like their gentle kiss in the schoolhouse. This was fire and need and the promise of oblivion. Clara's hands flew to his hair, holding him close as he backed her against the cool stone wall. 3 years of denial, of ice-cold control, melted away like spring snow. She was burning, drowning, flying all at once. Clara, he groaned against her throat. God, Clara! Her hands found his belt, fingers trembling with urgency. The leather was worn smooth from use, the buckle cold under her touch. She tugged it free with a sudden decisiveness, the action so bold it shocked them both into stillness. Luke pulled back, his breathing ragged. Clara! She held his gaze as she let the belt drop to the floor, the sound echoing in the chamber. Then, in a voice she barely recognized as her own, she whispered the words that would change everything. Your turn to obey. The candle flame danced, casting wild shadows as 2 people found each other in the darkness. Outside, Blackwood's men searched and cursed, but in the hidden chamber beneath the church, Clara Whitfield discovered that sometimes losing control was the only way to truly live. And for the first time in 3 years, she smiled. Dawn crept through the cracks in the mission walls like an unwelcome visitor. Clara woke to find herself wrapped in Luke's arms, his duster serving as their blanket on the cold stone floor. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of peace, listening to his heartbeat, feeling his warmth. Then reality crashed back. They were fugitives, hunted, with nowhere to run. You're thinking too loud, Luke murmured against her hair. We can't stay here forever. Father Miguel said. Father Miguel has already risked too much. She sat up, immediately missing his warmth, and began pinning up her wild hair with trembling fingers. Blackwood will tear this town apart. Every house, every building. Eventually, he'll come here. Luke watched her restore her armor of propriety, his expression unreadable. Having regrets, she turned to him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his casual tone. About last night, no, about dragging you into this mess every second. You didn't drag me anywhere. He stood, stretching muscles stiff from sleeping on stone. I walked in with my eyes wide open. A soft knock interrupted them. Father Miguel descended, his face grave. My children, there is news. Not good, I'm afraid. Tell us, Clara said, steeling herself. Judge Blackwood has declared martial law. He's brought in 20 more men, gunfighters from Tombstone and Phoenix. They're searching house to house and... The priest hesitated. What else? He's taken hostages, the Fletcher family, Mrs. Martinez and her children, young Tommy O'Brien. Says he'll release one child for every hour you remain hidden. After that, Clara's legs gave out. She sank onto the bench, horror washing over her. The children! He's using the children! That bastard! Luke snarled. Those kids have nothing to do with this. They have everything to do with this, Clara said quietly. They're my students. My responsibility. He knows I won't let them suffer for my choices. Clara, no! Luke gripped her shoulders. You can't give yourself up. Think what he'll do to you. And what about what he'll do to them? She stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. I won't have children's blood on my conscience. There has to be another way. Father Miguel wrung his hands. God would not ask such sacrifice. God asks sacrifice of us every day. Clara interrupted gently. The question is whether we're brave enough to answer. She moved with purpose, checking her derringer, smoothing her dress. Luke watched with growing desperation. If you go out there, I'm going with you. No. She turned to him, memorizing every line of his face. You'll stay here, live, find another town, another life. To hell with that. He caught her arm. You think I can just walk away after last night after everything? You have to. She pulled free, though it cost her. Promise me, Luke, promise you'll live. The only promise I'm making is that if you walk out that door, I'm 30 seconds behind you. They stared at each other, wills clashing. Father Miguel cleared his throat. Perhaps there is another way, a middle ground. Both turned to him. The priest continued. Judge Blackwood expects surrender, but what if we gave him something else? Something that would force his hand. Such as, the truth, publicly, before the whole town. Father Miguel's eyes gleamed with unexpected cunning. It's Sunday. In 2 hours, the church will be full. If you were to appear, to speak your piece before witnesses, he'd have a shot on the spot, Luke said. In a church before women and children. Even Blackwood isn't that bold. He maintains power through the illusion of law. Break that illusion. Clara felt hope stir. And we break his hold. But the hostages? Leave that to me. Father Miguel said, I have some influence yet. I'll demand their release as condition for allowing Blackwood's men into the church. He'll agree. He'll be too confident of victory to refuse. It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was better than surrendering meekly. Clara nodded. All right, but I'll need time to prepare. And, she glanced at her torn, dusty dress. Perhaps something more appropriate to wear. Father Miguel smiled. I believe the late Mrs. Santiago left some things in the vestry. She was about your size. As for preparation, he produced paper and ink from his robes. You have 1 hour. The next hour passed in a blur. Clara wrote frantically, documenting everything, Blackwood's corruption, the stolen documents, the murdered homesteaders, names, dates, connections. If she died today, at least the truth would survive. Luke paced like a caged wolf, checking and rechecking his guns. This is madness. Most acts of faith are. She signed the final page with a flourish. Father, if something happens, I'll ensure these reach the right hands. The priest promised. Now, let's see about that dress. The garment Mrs. Santiago had left was black silk, severe but elegant. It fit Clara like it had been made for her. As she emerged from behind the screen, Luke's breath caught. "You look like a woman going to her own funeral," she managed a wry smile. "Like a woman going to war." He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. "And winning it." Above them, church bells began to toll, calling the faithful to service. Clara squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of what was to come. "It's time." They climbed the stairs together, Father Miguel leading. The church was indeed filling families in their Sunday best, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Clara spotted her students scattered among the pews, their faces lighting up when they saw her. Then the doors burst open. Blackwood strode in, flanked by a dozen armed men. The congregation gasped, mothers pulling children close. "There," Blackwood pointed at Clara. "Arrest that woman!" "Judge Blackwood." Father Miguel's voice rang with authority. "This is a house of God. You will show respect, or I'll have you removed." "You'll have me." Blackwood's face purpled. "Oh man, I own this town." "You own buildings and fear," Clara said, stepping forward. "But you don't own truth." Every eye turned to her. She walked down the center aisle, Luke a protective shadow beside her. Her students watched with wide eyes. Mary Fletcher, Tommy O'Brien, Susanna Parker, all here, all safe. Father Miguel had kept his word. "Good people of Dusty Hollow," Clara began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly. "You know me. For 2 years. I've taught your children. I've lived among you quietly, properly, but sometimes propriety must yield to justice." "Silence her," Blackwood ordered. His men moved forward but stopped as cowboys throughout the church stood up. Ranch hands, drifters, men who'd had enough. Luke's influence, Clara realized. He'd been busier than just guarding her. "Let her speak," someone called out. Others took up the cry. Blackwood's hand went to his gun. "I'll restore order myself if I must." "You'll do nothing." A new voice, strong and commanding. A man in a federal marshal's badge stepped through the door. But this wasn't Blackwood's tame lawman. This was Samuel Grant, the honest prosecutor from Tucson. "Impossible," Blackwood breathed. "My men intercepted—" "Your men intercepted 2 saloon girls dressed as messengers," Molly Harper said, appearing beside the marshal. She winked at Clara. "The real messengers took a different route. Amazing what people will overlook when they're busy chasing the obvious." Clara felt her knees weak with relief. The documents had made it through. Blackwood was finished. But cornered rats fight hardest. Blackwood drew his gun, aiming at Clara. "If I burn, you burn with me." Time slowed. Clara saw the barrel swing toward her, saw death in Blackwood's eyes. She heard Luke's shout, saw him moving to shield her. The shot was impossibly loud in the church. Women screamed, children cried. But Clara remained standing. It was Blackwood who crumpled, his gun clattering across the floor. Behind him, Sheriff Mills lowered his smoking weapon. "Had enough of your law," Mills said quietly. "Time for some real justice." What followed was chaos transforming into order. Marshal Grant took charge, arresting Blackwood's men, taking statements. The judge himself survived, wounded but breathing, to face trial for his crimes. Through it all, Clara stood in a daze, hardly believing they'd won. Then small arms wrapped around her waist, Mary Fletcher burying her face in Clara's skirts. "I knew you'd save us," the child whispered. "I knew you would." Other students joined her, a cluster of young bodies seeking comfort. Over their heads, Clara met Luke's eyes. He stood apart, letting her have this moment, but his expression promised they'd have their own reunion soon. "Mrs. Whitfield." Marshal Grant approached, notebook in hand. "I'll need your full statement. The territorial governor is very interested in your documentation." "Of course." She gently disentangled herself from the children. "But first, might I have a moment?" She walked to Luke, aware of the entire congregation watching. Propriety demanded distance, formality. The old Clara would have offered a cool nod, perhaps a handshake. But the old Clara was gone, burned away in passion and gunfire and truth. She reached up, pulled his head down, and kissed him thoroughly in front of God and everyone. Gasps echoed through the church, along with a few approving whistles from the cowboys. When they parted, Luke was grinning. The Schoolmarm's causing another scandal. Good, Clara said firmly. I'm tired of being what everyone expects. From now on, I'm going to be who I am. And who's that? She considered the question, feeling the weight of watching eyes, the judgment of proper society. Then she smiled, a real smile, transformative and free. I'm Clara Whitfield, teacher, fighter, and apparently a woman who kisses cowboys in churches. She took his hand. Can you live with that? Ma'am, Luke said, raising her hand to his lips. I can't live without it. As the congregation erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked whispers, Clara felt something settle into place. The masquerade was over. The stern schoolmarm who never smiled had found her joy, her purpose, and her match. Whatever came next, rebuilding the school, testifying at trials, facing down those who judge her choices, she'd face it as herself, complete, unashamed, and thoroughly, scandalously alive. In the doorway, Molly Harper caught her eye and raised a flask in salute. To the schoolmarm, she called out. May she never be too stern to smile again? And Clara Whitfield laughed, full-throated and genuine, as the Arizona sun streamed through stained glass, painting them all in colors of redemption. The dust storm hit Dusty Hollow 3 days after Blackwood's arrest, as if the desert itself was trying to scour away the corruption that had taken root. Clara stood at the schoolhouse window, watching the brown wall approach, remembering another storm that had changed everything. But this time, she wasn't alone. Everyone inside? She called to the children playing in the yard. Quickly now. They scurried in, Mary Fletcher helping the younger ones. In the weeks since the confrontation at the church, Clara's classroom had swelled with new students, children whose parents now trusted the schoolmarm who'd risked everything for justice. Shall we continue with our history lesson? Clara asked as the first winds rattled the windows. Tell us about the gunfight again, Tommy O'Brien pleaded. When you shot them outlaws. That's not history, Thomas, that's gossip. But Clara's stern tone was softened by the hint of a smile. Now, who can tell me about the Boston Tea Party? As hands shot up, the door burst open. Luke struggled in, fighting the wind, his hat and shoulders covered in dust. The children giggled at his disheveled appearance. Pardon the interruption, Mrs. Whitfield. He removed his hat, shaking dust everywhere. But Marshal Grant's back from Prescott. Wants to see you urgent-like. Clara's stomach tightened. They'd been waiting for word about the investigation into Blackwood's network. Who else was involved? How deep the corruption ran? Children, read chapters 4 and 5. Susanna, you're in charge. She grabbed her shawl and followed Luke into the storm. The wind tried to tear them apart, but his arm around her waist kept her steady. They'd grown comfortable with such casual intimacy, though it still set tongues wagging. Marshal Grant waited in the sheriff's office, along with Mills and, surprisingly, Molly Harper. The saloon owner had become an unlikely ally, her network of information proving invaluable. Mrs. Whitfield. Grant stood as she entered. We need to discuss the trial. Blackwood's trial, I thought that was settled. It is. He'll hang for murder and corruption. But there's another matter. Grant pulled out a thick folder. Blackwood wasn't working alone. We've uncovered a conspiracy that reaches to the territorial capital. Land grabs, murdered homesteaders, bribes to officials. Your documentation started an avalanche. That's good, isn't it? Luke asked. It would be, if certain powerful people weren't trying to bury it. Grant's expression was grim. They want to make a deal with Blackwood? Lighter sentence in exchange for his silence. No. Clara's voice was sharp as her old ruler. Those families deserve justice, which is why I need you to testify, not just here, but in Prescott, before the territorial legislature. Grant leaned forward. You're the only witness Blackwood couldn't buy or intimidate. Your word carries weight. When? Tomorrow. There's a storm coming. Political, not weather. If we don't act fast, Blackwood's friends will find a way to silence this whole thing. Clara felt Luke tense beside her. Prescott meant days of travel through dangerous territory. It meant leaving everything she'd built here. I'll need someone to watch the school, she said simply. Molly laughed. Honey, you think I spent all those years listening to drunken cowboys without picking up some education I can handle your little angels for a few days? Clara couldn't hide her surprise. Don't look so shocked. I told you, I was a teacher once, before... She gestured at her red dress. Before life happened. Might be nice to remember what that felt like. Grant stood. We leave at dawn. Bring whatever evidence you have. And Mrs. Whitfield. Consider bringing protection. Blackwood's reach is long. After he left, Clara turned to Luke. You don't have to come. Try and stop me. His hand found hers. Though we need to talk about what happens after. After the trial. After the testimony. After we've finished cleaning up Blackwood's mess. He pulled her closer, mindless of Mills and Molly watching. Clara, these past weeks, working together, building something. I want that to continue. Luke? I'm not Thomas, he said roughly. I'm not educated or refined. I can barely read, and my manners would make your proper friends faint. But I love you. And I think we could build something good here. Clara's throat tightened. Through the window, she could see the schoolhouse, sturdy against the storm, her life's work, her purpose. I can't leave the school, she said quietly. Those children need... I'm not asking you to leave. Luke cupped her face. I'm asking you to let me stay, to let me be part of what you're building. Hell, I'll even learn to read proper if you'll teach me. Mills cleared his throat. If you two are done sparking, we got company. Through the storm, riders approached. Clara recognized several ranchers, led by Samuel Fletcher. They dismounted and crowded into the office, faces grim. Mrs. Whitfield, Fletcher began. We heard about Prescott, about you testifying. I am. Good, but that ain't enough. Fletcher glanced at his companions. We've been talking. What Blackwood did, it couldn't have happened if we'd stood up sooner. If we'd backed people like you instead of keeping our heads down. What are you saying? We're saying we're coming with you. All of us. Let those Prescott politicians see it ain't just one schoolmarm they're dealing with. It's a whole town that's sick of corruption. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Gentlemen, I don't know what to say. Say you'll let us ride with you. Fletcher said, say you'll let us make this right. She looked around the room, at these rough men who'd found their courage. At Molly, who'd risked everything to help. At Mills, who'd finally chosen justice over safety. At Luke, who loved her despite her sharp edges and controlling nature. All right, she said. We ride together. The storm howled outside, but inside. Clara felt a different kind of power building. Not the chaos of destruction, but the force of community united. That evening, she stood in the empty schoolhouse, preparing lessons for Molly to use. Luke found her there, as she knew he would. Second thoughts, he asked. Always, but not about this. She turned to face him. Luke, what you said earlier, I meant every word. I know, and that terrifies me. She moved closer, drawn by his warmth. I spent 3 years building walls, controlling everything, With you, I can't control anything. You make me feel... Feel what? Wild, reckless, like that woman who rode through gunfire and laughed. Her hands pressed against his chest. Is that who you want? Because I don't know if I can be her all the time. I don't want her all the time. His arms encircled her waist. I want the teacher who makes children believe in themselves. The woman who stands up to judges. The fighter who won't back down. And yes, the wild thing who grabbed my belt and told me to obey. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks at the memory. That was unusual for me. Good unusual. His grin was wicked. Stop fishing for compliments. But she was smiling too. Luke, if we do this, if we try to build something together, I need you to understand. The school comes first. It'll always be part of who I am. I wouldn't want you any other way. He kissed her forehead. Besides, someone needs to teach me those fancy words you use. Can't have my woman talking circles around me forever. Your woman. Poor choice of words. Clara considered. No, I think I like it. She pulled his head down for a proper kiss. Your woman, the cowboy Schoolmarm, has a nice ring. When they finally pulled apart, the storm had passed. Stars emerged, brilliant against the clear sky. Tomorrow would bring danger, long roads, uncertain battles. But tonight, Clara allowed herself this moment of peace. I should go, Luke said reluctantly. Early start tomorrow. Yes, but she didn't let go. Luke, that day in the courthouse, when you burst in talking about Samuel Fletcher, did you know even then? Know what? That we'd end up here. He was quiet for a moment. I knew you were different. Knew you were hiding fire under all that propriety. Did I know I'd love you? No. But I hoped there was something worth finding under all that starch and steel. And was there? More than I ever dreamed. He kissed her once more, then stepped back. Get some sleep, Schoolmarm. Tomorrow we go to war. After he left, Clara stood in her empty classroom, touching each desk, each book. This room had been her refuge, her kingdom. Now it would be her base of operations for something larger. She thought of Blackwood, wounded and caged, still pulling strings from his cell. Thought of the powerful men in Prescott who wanted to bury the truth. They believed one woman's testimony could be discredited, silenced, ignored. They were about to learn differently. Clara Whitfield had been too stern to smile for 3 long years, but she discovered something better than smiles. Purpose backed by passion, justice tempered with love, and the strength that came from standing with others instead of alone. She closed the schoolhouse door and walked through the quiet town. In windows, she saw families preparing for bed, unaware that their neighbors were preparing for battle. Good people who'd been cowed too long, now ready to roar. At the boarding house, Mrs. Abernathy waited with unexpected news. That Molly Harper brought this by, said you'd need it for Prescott. It was a traveling dress, respectable but elegant, in deep blue that would bring out her eyes. Clara fingered the fine fabric, touched by the gesture. She said to tell you, Mrs. Abernathy continued, that a woman can fight in silk as easy as wool. Easier, maybe, if it makes her feel powerful. Clara smiled. Trust a saloon owner to understand the armor of femininity. That night, she packed carefully. Her documentation, her derringer, the wooden cross Samuel Fletcher had carved, tokens of the journey that had brought her here. In the morning, she'd ride out to face whatever came next. But first, she allowed herself one last moment of the old life. She pulled her hair into its severe bun, buttoned her gray dress to the throat, and stood before the mirror. The stern schoolmarm stared back, ruler straight and unsmiling. Then, deliberately, Clara pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall free. She smiled at her reflection, not the polite expression she'd worn like a mask, but the wild, fierce joy of a woman who'd found herself in the most unlikely place. Tomorrow, Prescott, Tomorrow, testimony and danger in the fight for justice. Tonight, she was simply Clara, teacher, fighter, lover, friend, a woman too alive to be stern, too full of purpose to be silent, too surrounded by love to stand alone. The smile remained as she prepared for bed and followed her into dreams of dusty roads and clear skies, strong arms and children's laughter, and a future bright as Arizona stars. The return journey from Prescott stretched under a merciless sun, their victory in the territorial capital feeling hollow as dust. Clara rode between Luke and Marshall Grant, her body aching from days in the saddle, her heart heavier still. They had won. Blackwood's network was exposed. Arrests were being made. Justice was finally being served. But at what cost? "You did good in there," Grant said, breaking the silence. "That testimony was masterful." Clara didn't respond. She could still see the faces of those politicians, their shock when she'd produced evidence after evidence, their anger when the ranchers had stood behind her. But she also remembered their parting words, hissed in courthouse corridors. "This isn't over, Schoolmarm." Luke moved his horse closer, reading her mood. "What's wrong?" "They killed him," she said quietly. "Blackwood, found dead in his cell this morning before he could testify about the others." "Saved us a hanging," Luke said, but his voice lacked conviction. "And cost us the full truth. How many others were involved? How deep did this go?" Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "They silenced him to protect themselves." "You exposed enough," Grant assured her. "The land schemes are finished. The murders will be investigated. You've given those families justice." But Clara knew better. She'd seen the fear in certain eyes, the quick conferences in shadows. Blackwood was gone, but the rot remained, waiting for another opportunity. They reached Dusty Hollow at sunset, expecting a quiet return. Instead, they found chaos. Smoke rose from the direction of the school, and people ran through the streets. Clara spurred her exhausted horse forward, heart pounding. The schoolhouse still stood, but barely. Windows were shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. Books lay scattered in the dirt like dead birds. And on the front wall, painted in red, "Leave or burn." "No!" The word tore from Clara's throat as she dismounted, stumbling toward the destruction. Molly Harper emerged from the crowd, her face grim. "It happened last night. Group of riders, faces covered. I tried to stop them, but—" "The children?" "Safe. I got them out when I saw the riders coming." Molly touched Clara's arm. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save the books." Clara walked through the wreckage in a daze. Her desk was kindling. The slates were smashed. Everything she'd built, everything she'd cherished, reduced to debris. She picked up a torn reader, pages fluttering like wings. "Blackwood's friends," Luke said darkly. "Sending a message." "Then message received." Clara's voice was hollow. "They win. I can't put the children at risk." "Clara, no." Luke caught her shoulders. "This is what they want, to break you." "Then they've succeeded." She pulled away, moving deeper into the ruined classroom. "Look around. Luke, how can I teach without books, without supplies? How can I ask parents to send their children to a place that's been marked for violence?" The crowd outside grew larger. Clara could hear whispers, see the fear returning to faces that had briefly known hope. Some were already turning away, pulling their children with them.
Mrs. Whitfield?"
Mary Fletcher stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Are you leaving us?" Clara knelt beside the girl, her own eyes burning.
"I don't know, sweetheart. I just don't know."
"But you can't. You're the one who taught us to be brave, to stand up for what's right. Sometimes, Mary, being brave means knowing when you're beaten." "No," the child's voice fierce. "That's not what you taught us. You said courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." Clara stared at her student, seeing her own words reflected back. Behind Mary, other children gathered. Tommy O'Brien, Susanna Parker, the Martinez boys, her students, looking at her with trust she no longer felt she deserved. "She's right." The voice came from the crowd. Samuel Fletcher pushed forward, his wife beside him. "You stood for us when no one else would," he continued. "Now it's our turn." "Mr. Fletcher." "No, let me finish." He faced the crowd. "We all saw what happened here. We know who's behind it. Question is, are we going to let them win? Let them drive out the one person who gave a damn about justice in this town?" Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Clara saw fear. Yes, but something else too. Anger, determination. "They'll come back," someone called out. "Burn us out too." "Maybe," Fletcher agreed. "But I'd rather rebuild 100 times than bow down once more. Mrs. Whitfield taught our children that. Time we learned it too." One by one, people stepped forward. Ranchers, farmers, merchants, even some who'd supported Blackwood out of fear. They surveyed the damage with grim faces. "I got lumber at the ranch," one said. "I can get glass for them windows," offered another. "My wife's got extra books from back east." Clara felt Luke's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Still think you're beaten?" Sheriff Mills appeared, several deputies behind him. "Mrs. Whitfield, I've got men watching the roads. If those riders come back, we'll be ready." "And they will come back," Clara said. "This won't end with Blackwood's death." "Then we'll face them." Mills said simply, "Together." As if summoned by the word, people began moving. Without formal organization, they started cleaning. Children picked up scattered pages. Women swept broken glass. Men assessed structural damage, already planning repairs. Molly Harper approached with a bottle of whiskey. "For the shock," she said, offering it to Clara. Clara surprised herself by taking a swig. The liquor burned. But it also clarified. "Thank you for protecting the children, for everything." "Honey, those kids gave me more hope in 3 days than I've felt in years." Molly's painted smile was genuine. "Besides, I discovered something. I'm still a damn good teacher. Made Tommy O'Brien understand long division. That's gotta count for something." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Would you consider staying on as an assistant?" Molly's eyes widened. "You'd have the town scandal teaching their precious babies. I'd have a woman of courage and intelligence helping me rebuild." Clara's voice strengthened. "If they don't like it, they can send their children elsewhere, though I doubt they will." "You've proven yourself." "Well, hell," Molly blinked rapidly. "You keep surprising me. Clara Whitfield." As night fell, the schoolhouse looked less like a ruin and more like a construction site. Lanterns bobbed as people worked, their voices mixing with hammering and sawing. Clara stood in what had been her classroom, watching the community come together. "It'll be better than before," Luke said, joining her. "Stronger. It's not about the building." Clara leaned against him, exhaustion hitting hard. "It's about what it represents. As long as Blackwood's allies are out there, this will keep happening. Then we keep fighting." "For how long until they burn the whole town until someone gets killed?" Luke was quiet for a moment. "You remember what you told me that night in the church basement? About not knowing how to feel so much without breaking apart?" "Yes. You didn't break then. You won't break now." He turned her to face him. "Because you're not alone anymore. None of us are." Father Miguel appeared, leading a group of women carrying food for the workers. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, surveying the activity. "Sometimes destruction leads to stronger foundations." "Pretty words, Father," Clara said. "But will they matter when those riders return?" "Perhaps they already have their answer." The priest nodded toward the street. Clara looked and gasped. The road was filling with wagons and riders. ranch families from outlying areas, some traveling for hours after hearing the news. They came bearing supplies, tools, weapons, a small army of ordinary people, ready to stand guard. Word spread fast. Mills explained. Seems folks are tired of being pushed around. They're setting up camp, taking shifts. Anyone wants to attack this school will have to go through half the county. Clara felt tears spill over.
Why would they risk this?
Because you risked everything for us. Fletcher said.
Because you showed us what courage looks like.
Because our children deserve better than fear. The work continued through the night. By dawn, the schoolhouse stood proud again, scarred but solid, different but unbroken. Clara walked through the restored classroom, running her fingers over makeshift desks, breathing in the scent of fresh lumber and hope. You should rest, Luke said, finding her at her salvaged desk.
You've been up for 2 days.
Can't sleep, too much to think about. Such as the future. Those men in Prescott won't give up. This victory is temporary. All victories are temporary. Luke pulled her onto his lap, ignoring her half-hearted protest about propriety. That doesn't make them less worth fighting for. When did you become so wise? Must be all that book learning you're forcing on me. He kissed her temple. Clara, I need to ask you something. Something in his tone made her pull back to see his face.
What is it? This fight, it's going to continue, maybe for years, and I'll stand with you every step, if you'll have me. But,
he reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. I'd like to do it as your husband. Clara's breath caught.
Luke!
I know it's not fancy. No, I'm not what you probably imagined. She silenced him with a kiss. When they parted, both were breathless. Is that a yes? That's we're in the middle of a crisis, and you're proposing. Seems like the perfect time. His thumb traced her cheekbone. When else will we have half the county here as witnesses? Clara laughed, surprising herself.
You're impossible.
Is that a yes? She looked at the ring. Simple and honest, like the man offering it. Thought of all the reasons to say no, the danger, the uncertainty, the impropriety of a widow remarrying so soon. Then she thought of facing whatever came next with Luke beside her, and all those reasons crumbled.
Yes,
she whispered.
Yes, you impossible, wonderful man.
He slipped the ring onto her finger as the sun rose fully, painting the classroom in gold. Outside, she could hear children arriving for school despite everything, their voices bright with excitement about the new schoolhouse. Mrs. Whitfield. Mary Fletcher peered in.
Are we having lessons today?
Clara stood, smoothing her skirts, settling into her teacher persona. Of course, though we'll need to share books until new ones arrive.
That's okay. We can share.
Mary noticed Clara's hand, eyes widening. Is that a wedding ring?
It is.
The girl beamed. So you're staying forever? Clara looked at Luke, at the rebuilt classroom, at the community standing guard outside, at the life she'd built from ashes and determination. Yes, she said firmly. I'm staying. As students filed in, chattering about the night's events. Clara felt a strange peace settle over her. Blackwood's allies would return. There would be more fights, more struggles. But she wouldn't face them as the stern schoolmarm who never smiled. She'd face them as Clara Whitfield, soon to be Clara Morgan teacher, fighter, and part of something larger than herself. A community that had learned to stand together, to rebuild stronger, to choose hope over fear. The bell rang, calling the children to order, and for the first time since Thomas died, Clara began the day not with rigid control, but with joy. Good morning, class, she said, smiling at their eager faces. Today, we're going to learn about rebuilding, about how sometimes the strongest structures are those that have been tested by fire and survived. Open your readers, those of you who have them, to Chapter 7. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning. 6 weeks after the schoolhouse had been rebuilt. Clara stood before the mirror in Molly Harper's room above the saloon, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back. Gone was the severe gray dress and tight bun. Instead, she wore her mother's wedding dress, ivory silk that Molly had somehow procured from back east, with her dark hair flowing loose beneath a simple veil. "You clean up nice, schoolmarm," Molly said, adjusting the veil. "Though I still say you should have let me add some color. A little rouge never hurt anyone. I think I'm scandalizing the town enough by having my wedding reception in a saloon," Clara replied, but she was smiling. "Former saloon," Molly corrected. "As of this morning, it's officially Harper's Social Hall, more respectable for the assistant schoolteacher." Clara caught her friend's hand. "You didn't have to change everything for me. Didn't do it for you. Did it for me." Molly's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Turns out I like teaching those little hellions. Like feeling respectable. Besides, the town needs a proper social hall more than another whiskey joint." A knock interrupted them. Mary Fletcher peered in, wearing her best dress and carrying a bouquet of desert wildflowers. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Morgan's getting awful nervous down there. Sheriff Mills says if you don't hurry, Luke might wear a hole in the floor." Clara took the bouquet, breathing in the scent of sage and rabbit brush. "Then we'd better not keep him waiting." The walk to the church had been transformed into a processional. The entire town lined the streets, children throwing flower petals, women dabbing their eyes, men nodding respectfully. Clara saw her students beaming, the Fletcher family standing proud, even Mrs. Abernathy looking almost approving. At the church door, Samuel Fletcher waited to walk her down the aisle. "You sure about this, ma'am? Not too late to run?" "Mr. Fletcher, I've faced down corrupt judges and hired guns. I think I can handle one cowboy." "That you can," he offered his arm. "Though between you and me, that cowboy looks about ready to faint." Indeed, Luke stood at the altar looking pale beneath his tan, his new suit fitting awkwardly on his rancher's frame. But when he saw Clara, his whole face transformed. The love in his eyes made her steps falter, overwhelmed by the enormity of what they were doing. Then he smiled, that crooked grin that had first broken through her defenses, and her feet moved of their own accord. The ceremony was simple, Father Miguel's words washing over them like a benediction. Clara barely heard them, too focused on Luke's face, on the calloused hands holding hers, on the moment when he slipped a second ring beside the engagement band. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Father Miguel said, "You may kiss your bride." Luke cupped her face gently, the schoolmarm who was too stern to smile. He murmured, for her ears alone, "Look at you now." "Less talking," Clara whispered back. "More kissing." Their lips met to thunderous applause. When they turned to face the congregation, Clara saw not just a crowd, but a community, their community, forged in conflict and strengthened by shared purpose. The reception at Harper's Social Hall was unlike any Dusty Hollow had seen. Ranchers mixed with the merchants. Former saloon girls served lemonade alongside church ladies, and children ran between tables while their parents danced to the Mexican musicians Father Miguel had found. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sheriff Mills said, raising a glass. "The schoolmarm and the cowboy. What's next, cats and dogs living together?" "Don't give her ideas," Luke laughed, spinning Clara in a waltz. "She'll probably try to teach them to read." Clara leaned into her husband, feeling lighter than she had in years. Would that be so terrible? "Nothing you do is terrible," he said softly. "Impossible, sometimes, magnificent, always, but never terrible." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a week at Luke's ranch, which would now be their home. Clara had worried about leaving the school, but Molly had shooed her off. "Those kids can survive a week with me. Go be a bride. The revolution will wait." But as they climbed into the wagon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Riders moving fast. The music stopped. Hands moved to weapons. Marshal Grant rode in, his horse lathered with sweat. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, tipping his hat to Clara. "Mr. Morgan, sorry to interrupt, but you need to hear this." "What's happened?" Luke demanded. "The investigation in Prescott. It's uncovered something bigger than we thought. Blackwood wasn't just stealing land. He was part of a syndicate, mining interests, railroad barons, even some folks in Washington. They're cleaning house, eliminating everyone who might testify." Clara's joy evaporated. "The witnesses." "Protected, for now. But they want you for, ma'am, you're the one who started this avalanche. There's a price on your head. A big one." Luke's arm tightened around her. "How much?" $5,000, dead or alive." Gasps rippled through the crowd. That was more money than most would see in a lifetime. "We'll leave," Luke said immediately. "Tonight. Head for California." "No!" Clara's voice cut through the panic. "We're not running." "Clara, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable." She stood in the wagon, addressing the crowd. "They want me to run because they know what we've built here. They know that as long as one town stands against them, others might follow. If we flee, they win." "But the danger," someone called out. "Has always been here," Clara finished. "The only difference is now we know its face." She looked at each person gathered. "I won't force anyone to stand with us. If you want to distance yourself, I understand. But I'm staying. This is my home. These are my people, and I'll be damned if I let them take that away." Silence stretched long. Then Mary Fletcher pushed forward. "If Mrs. Morgan stays, we stay." Her father nodded. "The Fletchers stand with the Morgans." One by one, families declared their loyalty. By the end, only a handful had slipped away into the night. Marshal Grant shook his head. "You folks are either the bravest or the most foolish people I've ever met." "Probably both," Clara admitted. "But we're together. That has to count for something." As the crowd dispersed, Luke helped Clara down from the wagon. "So much for our honeymoon. We'll have our whole lives for honeymoons." She touched his face. "Right now, we have a war to win." They spent their wedding night, not at the ranch, but in the rooms above the schoolhouse, standing watch with others who'd volunteered for guard duty. It wasn't the romantic evening Clara had imagined, but as she lay in Luke's arms, listening to him breathe, she felt a different kind of contentment. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About marrying you, never." She turned to face him. "About the fight we've chosen sometimes. But then I think about Mary Fletcher's face when she reads a difficult passage, or Tommy O'Brien's pride when he solves a problem, and I know we're doing what's right. Even if it costs us everything. What's everything compared to living with purpose?" She kissed him gently. "Besides, I've already lost everything once. Survived that. Whatever comes next, we'll face it. Together." Together. Dawn came too soon, bringing new challenges, but also bringing something else. Hope. As Clara dressed for her first day as Mrs. Morgan, she looked out the window to see children arriving for school despite everything. Their parents walked them to the door, some carrying rifles, all carrying determination. "Ready for this?" Luke asked, buckling on his gun belt. "I've been ready my whole life," Clara replied. "I just didn't know it until now." She descended to the classroom where Molly was already preparing lessons. Together, they faced the children. Tomorrow's hope. Today's responsibility. "Good morning, class," Clara said, her wedding ring catching the light. "Today we're going to learn about courage. Not the kind in storybooks, but the real kind. The kind that gets up every morning and does what needs doing, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." As young voices rose in recitation, Clara felt the truth of her own words. They would face whatever came: bounty hunters, corrupt officials, the long reach of moneyed interests. But they would face it as they were now united, unafraid, and absolutely unwilling to surrender what they'd built. The schoolmarm, who had been too stern to smile, now smiled freely, loved fiercely, and fought tirelessly. She'd found her purpose, her people, and her partner. The rest was just details. Outside, Luke and the other men kept watch. Inside, Clara taught the next generation to read, write, and think for themselves. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen. And as the Arizona sun climbed higher, blessing their small act of rebellion with its warmth, Clara Morgan knew with bone-deep certainty that they'd already won the only battle that truly mattered, the battle to live authentically, courageously, and together. The stern schoolmarm was gone. In her place stood something far more dangerous to those who traded in oppression, a woman who knew her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. And somewhere in the great beyond, perhaps Thomas smiled too, knowing his wife had finally found what he'd always wished for her, not just contentment, but joy, not just safety, but purpose, not just existence, but life itself, lived fully and without apology. The bell rang, calling them to the day's work, and Clara Morgan, teacher, fighter, wife, and revolutionary, answered its call with her whole heart. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this Wild West tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought about Clara and Luke's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love and courage.